Thanks for coming tonight. As I said, I'm Alicia Wolf. I'm the owner of The Dizzy Cook. I'm also a part owner of Migraine Strong, a writer for My Chronic Brain and Migraine Again. I'm a volunteer for Miles for Migraine, and I also am the author of a new cookbook that's coming out next year, next February of 2020, called The Dizzy Cook, and it's full of migraine diet recipes. So American Migraine Foundation has me speaking today on my story with vestibular migraine and also how I got into a migraine diet and how cooking really changed my life with migraine. And so you can ask questions along the way and I'll get to them at the end. And this will be kind of an interactive chat for us. So I'll go ahead and get started with my story. In early 2016, I felt dizziness, lightheadedness, a sense of being off balance after a long trip. And all my doctors told me I was just really stressed to calm down. My symptoms eventually grew into a more severe disassociation where I felt very detached from my surroundings. I had vertigo episodes, either the spinning or where I felt like I was moving when I was standing still, drop attacks, and walking on marshmallows or clouds. Sometimes I felt like I was rocking, and I seriously thought I had a brain tumor. And everyone kept telling me I was just stressed out. So that stressed me out even more. It took me nearly 6 months to get a diagnosis of vestibular migraine. And I went through 7 doctors in that time, multiple diagnoses, different diagnosis. And I was finally diagnosed with vestibular migraine by a neurologist. And when he first told me, I didn't believe it because I never got head pain, or I rarely got head pain. And they told me that only a certain percentage of people actually experience head pain with vestibular migraine. So that was really interesting to me. So that's why not many doctors understood it. And then it's also only become a diagnosis in the last 10 years. So there's becoming more standards now on how to diagnose it, but it's still not very widely known. I'm kind of wondering, did anyone else have this issue with being diagnosed? I usually hear that people have a very similar experience to what I went through as well. So if you want to just write in the comments, I'd love to hear that. Symptoms of vestibular migraine are dizziness, or sometimes they call it giddiness, memory loss, delayed cognitive function, like I couldn't remember the name of like a pen or pencil, derealization, depersonalization, so like the feeling I talked about, being detached from the world around you. Sometimes you'll experience what's called Alice in Wonderland syndrome, where things appear distorted. It's really, really freaky when it happens to you, and you can't fathom that it's even a migraine symptom. I have a whole list on my website, thedizzycook.com. I did a partnership with Dr. Cho from the House Clinic, and we kind of went through some of the symptoms he sees a lot and described them. So if you think you have vestibular migraine, you can go check that out. But in that period of time, it took me so long to be diagnosed. I lost my job, and I was there for 8 years, and they weren't willing to accommodate my needs. So I totally understand being faced with that kind of pressure at your workplace. And I highly recommend, if you're going through that, to consult with a lawyer too, because I didn't understand my rights on FMLA. And if I would have gone back, I could have known that. But that's a different story. But in that time, my world was wrapped up in my career, and I fell into depression and anxiety. I didn't know who I was without that job. And with my new symptoms, I was scared to leave the house. I felt so hopeless. I felt not good enough for anything. I would watch the TV and fight with my insurance all day and didn't know what I could do when I felt this dizzy all the time. I couldn't drive anywhere. Like, who would hire someone like me? So I had to figure out who I was without that job and who I was with migraine. with so much free time at home, I found myself making small goals. And one of those goals was trying to cook a little bit more, as well as researching everything I could about this illness. And that's how I found out about migraine diets. And have you guys ever tried a migraine diet? I'd love to know. Let me see. So we can talk about that later in the comments too. But if one has worked for you, please, talk about it in the comments. There are so many. And it's really hard to pick the one that's best for you sometimes. I decided on one called Heal Your Headache because it was endorsed by Johns Hopkins, and I felt like it was the easiest to incorporate in my life. But certain things that work for other people didn't work for me, like going gluten and dairy free made no difference for me. And my triggers ended up being nuts, caffeine, and yogurt, which I used to eat all the time because they were considered healthy. So what is great for me may not work for you, and likewise. So migraine diets can be very hard to pinpoint. It takes a while to kind of find the one that's right for you. At the very base of it, I think it's important that you're cooking more at home and eating more fresh, whole foods. They're really, really hard, though, and overwhelming at first, because I thought I ate healthy, and then I was looking at, some of the labels in my kitchen and comparing them to a hidden MSG list, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I have to throw out everything. So I understand feeling that way. But I always loved to cook, and I've always been inspired by people like Christina Tosi and Ina Garten and Deb from Smitten Kitchen, these powerhouse women who are all about a simple home-cooked meal or dessert at the end of the day. And I wanted to try to find recipes that fit my new diet, but still with the old flair that I used to love. And so the biggest joy I found from the migraine diet was bringing me back to the kitchen. And it showed me my new purpose. It was the one thing I could control in my life. It gave me an opportunity to feel valuable and contribute to my family when I wasn't contributing financially. It also allowed me to connect with my husband a little more. And I think when you're suffering from chronic migraine, it's sometimes really difficult to connect with the others who don't quite understand what you're going through, as hard as they try, So we could sit down at the end of the day, talk with each other and connect on that level a little bit. I stopped looking at cooking as a chore, and I started looking at it as an opportunity. Like, I don't need to do this. I get to do this. This is the one thing I get to do for myself. It was helping me to improve my health and lower my migraine days. I was able to try out a new skill and test what I already knew about cooking. And I was able to feel happy by bringing others meals and put a smile on their face. And I think that's really important, to do other good things for other people when you feel so low yourself. I always am reminded by the episode in Friends where Phoebe is trying to find the totally selfless act, and she lets the bee sting her. And it's kind of like that. When you cook for someone else, you are giving them something, but you're also getting a little bit of happiness for yourself. So I try to find a way to translate this new passion into helping others, especially others with vestibular migraine. Because at the time I launched the Dizzy Cook, there was very little info on vestibular migraine, including people's experience. Everything online was very clinical. And there were also very few migraine diet recipes that I actually wanted to make. I didn't want to eat kale all day. It was not my passion. I wanted enchiladas, and I wanted queso and gooey brownies, which ended up translating into blondies. So I kind of saw this need for someone who wasn't creating super duper healthy recipes, but ones that were made at home, where you were making your own enchilada sauce and not buying the store-bought version, which has additives and could have triggering ingredients like MSG and stuff like that. So that's kind of how the site was born. And for me, diet was that missing piece. Like, it not only got me to 100% days again, where my meds and supplements and everything else I was doing contributed to that base of helping me out, but that the diet really pushed me over that edge. And it also helped me to eventually wean off my preventative medication. And I mainly did that to try to conceive, which I know is important to a lot of women out there. So I think there are a lot of treatments out there that you can work with and still make a lot of progress too. And migraine diet's a good option for that. They also don't have to be forever. So that was something I kept telling myself while I was going through it is, this is just temporary. But the skills I learned from cooking and that you can learn from cooking is something that will stay with you forever and that you can pass down to your family, your kids, anyone you want. So I'll kind of go through some of my tips for getting into cooking, especially when you have chronic migraine. The first one is to start slow and easy. So sheet pan meals, slow cooker meals like pulled pork. I have a recipe on the site for that. You just dump everything in the pot. A lot of people love instant pots now. Things that you can make ahead, like meatballs and like the pulled pork too. You can freeze that and keep it in your freezer so you can always have it on hand if you're not having a good day, it's a high pain day, that'll keep you from reaching for, something that might not be as great for you. There's also a 5-day meal plan on my site with a lot of these recipes that are really easy to make and easy to freeze. For me, with vestibular migraine, and I don't know if it was like this for anyone else, but I had a hard time standing for long periods of time. And so I used to have to bring in a stool or something to sit on. And sometimes my family members would come in, they would be like, can we help you? And I'm like, no, I want to do it myself. So hard-headed about that, but I just would have these attacks and kind of power through a little bit because it was such a good feeling for me to be able to accomplish that one thing at the end of the day. And I really think that's important for other people too. Just kind of put yourself out there and don't make yourself sick over it. Push yourself a little bit to do some of these things and to maybe experience something that you haven't tried before. On higher energy days, that's a perfect option, is to push yourself to try something you haven't tried before, like scallops. A lot of people are scared of scallops, and they actually only take about 2-3 minutes on each side, and you flip them and you sear them, and they're really easy to make and a super fast dinner if you can kind of get over that fear of how to cook them. Another one is a whole roast chicken. I think people are very intimidated by that, but there's nothing better than your house smelling like a whole roast chicken, and it can be ready in like 10 minutes. It's like 10 minutes hands-on time. You stick it in the oven. So I encourage you to try out some of those recipes that you may be a little scared to try. Homemade broth is another great one. A lot of times in the stores, they can be full of additives or lots of sodium, which is important for some people, or, hidden MSG. So if you can make it in your own Instant Pot, that's a great option. Freeze it for later. I think one thing to note, everyone says, oh, migraine diets are so expensive and cooking at home is so expensive all the time. But if you're choosing certain foods and you're thinking you have to buy all organic, that's not necessarily the case. I mean, you should really look at what you can afford. And obviously, if you can afford that, that's wonderful, but don't feel pressure to buy the most expensive organic biodynamic items out there, because really, if you're just focusing on whole, clean foods and shopping that perimeter of the grocery store, it's going to probably come as a huge benefit to you in the long run anyway. The other thing I really like to do, and I know you guys might think I'm crazy, but I love to have a small dinner party at my house. And the reason for this is I can control the menu. I can control the lights, and I can control the smells. So if someone has like a crazy candle burning from Bath and Body Works, I don't have to deal with that at my own house. So it allows you to be social without that worry of extra triggers, and you can control that menu and what you're making. And it doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, some of my favorite things to cook for our friends are burgers, or that crock pot pulled pork, or a roast chicken. And it's easy to do. It takes that stress off of you. One of the quotes I really love is from Alison Roman, and I saw it in the New York Times recently. And she says, "It's not entertaining, it's having people over." And I love that quote, because it shouldn't be that pressure of entertaining. It should just be about that company and that social aspect of your life that we need, and just that chance to smile and laugh a little bit. Because I want to bring a little bit of happiness back into your life when migraine can be so heavy. And one of the things she goes on to say is using your time and resources to cook for those you care about is the ultimate expression of love. And love is about expressing joy, not producing anxiety. So the other thing I want you to know is you can do this. And that's how I feel like for everyone is you can do this. So even if you're struggling with chronic migraine, chronic pain of any kind, I encourage you to step out of your comfort zone a little bit, try to get back into cooking, maybe look at, a diet, one of the diets that American Migraine Foundation recommends, and see if that could be an option for your migraine treatment plan.